when the Buddha was still Prince Siddhartha Gautama, he saw what are called the four messengers. And these four messengers gave him the message to find out how to transcend dukkha. I'll be using that word, the Pali word dukkha. I'll translate it now, but you'll see that in English it has so many connotations that it's so much simpler to use it in Pali, just 2 syllables. It's pain, grief, and lamentation, tragedy and sorrow, but it isn't only that. It's all unsatisfactoriness. It's that little inner voice which says there must be more to life than what I've experienced. It's that inner urge to do more, to know more, to experience more. It's that unease that arises in the mind. It's everything that doesn't give peace. It's dukkha. So he saw these four messengers, the story says, on 4 successive days. And having seen those 4 messengers, he decided he was going to do something about finding out about dukkha. The 4 messengers were a very old person, bent by age, a very sick person, unable to help himself, and a dead person being carried to the cremation ground and the family weeping. And then the 4th one was a renunciate with a very calm and serene countenance, walking very mindfully. And he thought there must be something more than what happens to everyone. And he spent the next 6 years finding out. Now, because he gave his enlightenment statement about dukkha, people that don't know enough about the Buddhist teaching often think and say, and even write, that the teaching is negative, pessimistic, concerned with pain and sorrow, even nihilistic, which are all mistaken views, every one of them. The Buddha's aim and his wonderful result was that he found out what dukkha really is and showed us a way to transcend it. Now, the first step on our way to transcend dukkha is to recognize the fact that we've got it. And not everybody is willing to do that. Not everybody is willing to admit that there's dukkha in their lives. One of our most popular pastimes is to blame somebody else for it. It's due to the partner, the children, the weather, the government, the Americans, the job, the boss, you name it. Anything will do. And the mind justifies that. Of course, that person. Of course, that situation. If we get stuck in that, blaming someone or something outside of ourselves for our dukkha, we haven't got a spiritual path. In fact, we can just as well forget about meditation. Meditation has to be embedded in spiritual living. That doesn't mean that one has to give up one's job and one's family. Not at all. It means or has to mean that one gives up one thinking about external matters and finds the truth within oneself. So if we're still concerned, I don't know if we are or not, but if we are, with blaming something outside of ourselves for our dukkha, that needs to be a contemplation. That contemplation can be extremely enlightening, because the question is, why am I blaming this or that for my dukkha? And the answer will be, because I don't like it the way it is. And that's exactly what dukkha is. I don't like things the way they are. I want them different. That is how our dukkha arises. This is actually the first and second noble truths of the Buddha's enlightenment statement, which he gave when he gave his first Dhamma discourse, the Dhammacakkappavattana Sutta, the discourse which started the wheel of the Dhamma turning. He saw that truth under the famous Bodhi tree in what's today Bodh Gaya, and then propounded it and called it the Four Noble Truths. And the first two say, there's dukkha. Existence is dukkha, the noble truths of dukkha. And there's only one reason for dukkha. Makes it nice and easy, doesn't it? Just one reason, namely craving. But making it nice and easy doesn't mean that we know how to get rid of it. We've got to give this some very profound contemplation over a period of time. None of this happens overnight, or very little anyway. Craving means wanting to have and to keep, or wanting to get rid of. Both are craving. So when there's something that we're blaming for our unhappiness, and we can inquire into it and ask ourselves, why? Why does this make me unhappy? The answer invariably has to be, because either I don't want it the way it is, I want to get rid of it, or I want to get something and I haven't got it. Either I want to get it and haven't got it, or I've got it and want to get rid of it. And that's all there is to dukkha. The smallest, medium, and largest dukkha. Now, accepting things the way they are doesn't mean that we can't discriminate. It doesn't mean that we are bereft of discrimination between good and evil. It would be dreadful. We wouldn't be able to keep our precepts. But we refrain from blaming anything that happens for our own unhappiness. We see that our own unhappiness is caused by ourselves because of dissatisfaction. Dissatisfaction with the way things are. When we have got that far, we may be able to let go of some other very popular pastimes trying to get rid of dukkha. A very popular one is to try and remove oneself from the place where apparently dukkha is taking place. Going to a different country, going to a different teacher, going to a different partner, moving from the city to the country or from the country to the city, growing one's own food, stopping to grow one's own food. Whatever it is one is doing the opposite. Learning a new profession. All of that is a removal from the old ways of being to hopefully new ones. Now, essentially, there's nothing wrong with learning a new profession. There's absolutely nothing wrong with growing one's own carrots. But to hope and believe that if that outer change has been made, one will then find eternal happiness is foolishness. As everyone who has tried this knows. Everyone who has tried even one of those, probably more than once, knows already. It's a change of the outer situation, which can be helpful at times, but it will not provide the end of dukkha. It can't. Why can't it? First of all, because within ourselves we haven't learned yet how to get rid of dukkha. We're still reacting. And secondly, because of impermanence. Whatever's happening now won't be happening tomorrow. It won't even be happening the next minute. Blaming, removing ourselves from here to there. We have other ways of dealing with our dukkha, equally unsuccessful. Distraction. And in our technological age, all we need is to press a button. A television goes on. We can telephone somebody. The radio goes on. We have so many buttons we can press. Turn on the microwave. There's buttons everywhere. We can go to the movies. We can pick up a novel. Go to a library. Talk to the neighbors over the fence. Anything at all, to not have to look at one's own dukkha. Obviously, none of these things in themselves are blameworthy. Not at all. They're part of human life. And they're perfectly all right. But they will not provide indefinite sukha, the opposite of dukkha. They can't. So we are always hoping that through one of these measures, which we are adapting and adopting to our life and adapting to our dukkha, that through one of them we'll find the answer, never to be unhappy again. It's impossible. That's what the Buddha found out when he looked at decay, disease, and death. Nobody's immune from those. Everybody has to go through with that. And basically, most people try to get out of the dukkha of decay, disease, and death by not thinking about it. And then experiencing the dukkha with a vengeance when it happens, on their deathbed, or on the deathbed of a loved one, or when terminal illness strikes, or when they lose that which they really want to keep. So trying to stick one's head in the sand and not look at it is no answer either. The answer is to first understand it. Actually, understanding dukkha is not only the enlightenment statement of the Buddha, which should be already enough for it, but it's also the first step on transcendental dependent origination. Now, dependent origination is the key to the Buddhist teaching because it's cause and effect. And transcendental means to transcend the human and worldly affairs while we're still in this body. This is one of the great beauties of the Buddhist teaching. He was a human being and became enlightened, which gives us the assurance that it's possible for human beings. Another thing which gives us this assurance is the fact that he taught every single day for 45 years, even when he became old and not so well anymore. He was still teaching on his deathbed. And he was teaching ordinary people like ourselves. And if that doesn't mean that he knew they could become enlightened, transcend all dukkha, it would have been a waste of time. So we have that assurance. But we need to use our mind a little differently from the way we usually do. Usually we use our mind to make a living, which is of course quite necessary, and do everything that's needed there, and to do all the things which are necessary for survival, which are also very necessary. We use our mind to become acquainted with our distractions that we have and use, but we don't use our mind to see deeper truth. When we use our mind to find deeper truth, that's contemplation. So dukkha is a sort of a overall heading for the first four of those daily recollections. And we don't even have to look at decay, disease, and death, and all that is mine and dear and delightful will change and vanish, in order to contemplate our own dukkha. We can use anything at all in our life which we don't like the way it is. Now we can try out very easily whether the Buddha's first and second noble truths are actually correct. We can do that within an instant. If there's anything at all in our life, physical, mental, or emotional, situation-wise or feeling-wise, that we would like to have different, and therefore are not totally satisfied, drop that dissatisfaction for a moment. You can pick it up again a moment later and have the same dukkha all over again. Just drop the dissatisfaction for one moment, right now, and look at the situation or the feeling or the emotion or whatever it may be and say, that's the way it is. It's also impermanent, but that's the way it is right now. And having dropped the wish to have it different, no dukkha. The wish to have it different makes dukkha. This is a contemplation which we can use for anything in our lives, anything at all. It doesn't have to be decay, disease, and death. Although the Buddha did use those, they were very significant for him. And he could immediately see that they meant dukkha for humanity. Even if we have everything else that anybody could want, which is fairly unlikely, we still have decay, disease, and death. Guaranteed. With dukkha as a given in our lives, what we need to do is to recognize the fact that it's universal, that nobody has a monopoly. Everybody has it in some manner or form. Some person's back aches, some person's heart aches, some person's purse aches. Everybody's got dukkha. Most people's emotions ache. And recognizing our own dukkha, accepting it for what it is, not trying to change the situation, but trying to change ourselves, will help us to recognize everyone else on that same level, not feeling alienated and separated, or even thinking, I've got so much dukkha, how can I be nice to these people? They don't seem to have any. They smile. I don't. Nothing of the sort. Everybody's got it. And whichever dukkha we have, that's the one we think is major. And the one that our neighbor has, we think is minor, because we don't feel it. But when we realize what we've got and how we deal with it, or I should rather say, how we don't deal with it, and then we know what everybody else is doing. And the lack of alienation and separation makes it possible to have compassion. Compassion for ourselves and others. When we realize it's not easy to be a human being, and even more difficult to be a good human being. And everybody has that same difficulty. And when we arouse compassion for ourselves, for this difficulty which is dukkha, and a given, then our whole relationship to other people changes. We are accepting, and we can be soft-hearted towards their difficulties. We know when we do that dukkha, suffering, does not disappear. Give a thought for 1 second to the history of mankind. Whatever you know about that history is plenty, sufficient. Whatever you learned in school. Has there ever been a year or a day without dukkha? Has there ever been anything or anyone where there wasn't something happening that was usually major tragedies? The minor ones are not written up in the history books. Mankind has dukkha. Each one of us has it. But, and this is the wonderful teaching that we have, there's a way to get beyond it. And there we have to change our thinking 180 degrees. Because all those ways of dealing with dukkha that we have are all designed to make dukkha go away. The blaming, the removing oneself, the removing the cause, the distractions, everything is supposed to make dukkha go away. Dukkha won't go away. The one who's having it can go away. And that is what the teaching of the Buddha came to when he became enlightened. That we are operating under an illusion. And this illusion is so strongly embedded within us that we feel it all the time. And it's creating dukkha for us over and over again. It's the illusion of being a separate person, an individual, an identity. That's not just a thought. It's a feeling. Everybody knows when they get up in the morning, I'm getting up. Everybody knows when they sit down to meditate, I'm sitting down to meditate. They feel it. They don't have to say it. Nobody says, I'm getting up. You can feel it. That's me getting up. And that's me being dissatisfied. And it's me having dukkha. And the Buddha's great enlightenment explanation was not that dukkha can go away. Dukkha is here to stay. As long as there are beings, existence, there'll be dukkha. But this delusion can go away. And then we're beyond dukkha. So it is necessary to know that all the teaching, whichever part of it we become acquainted with, leads in that direction. It's not annihilation. We're going to look exactly the same as before. We can think and talk and act. But that feeling of this is me doing all that, and me wanting to get away from dukkha, that's gone. There's nobody being annihilated, because there was nobody there in the first place. There was only delusion. The whole teaching goes in that direction, and we have to understand that is the direction. We don't need to understand the whole thing. We don't need to even feel the whole thing. But we need to know the direction so that we can follow the Dhamma with all our heart and mind. Our meditation is geared in that direction. Meditation is not just an isolated instance of trying to focus the mind. We need to know what we're focusing on. We need to know what we're actually trying to accomplish. The promise of the Buddha that we can all get beyond dukkha is something we have to take on faith at this moment, because we haven't got beyond dukkha yet. But if we take such a promise at its face value, all it means is that we're willing to try. And that's all the Buddha asked people to do. Try it out. Try out the methods. Try out the instructions and see whether they help. We don't get past dukkha immediately. Nothing of the kind. Meditation can take dukkha away temporarily. But how long does anyone sit in meditation? But what we need to know and what we need to experience is the possibility that through seeing things in a different light, seeing ourselves in a different light, seeing dukkha universally and not individually, we have a chance to have a totally different relationship to everything that happens in our life. For instance, when our body is hurting, is not doing what we'd like it to do, when it has some sort of difficulty, the mind becomes upset. The mind reacts to that. It would much rather have the body different. In fact, the mind often devises ways and means of trying to get rid of that particular difficulty instead of meditating. It can become so upset that it can't think of anything else if it's strong enough. The dukkha is strong enough. The Buddha said about that an unenlightened person has two arrows that can hurt them, whereas the enlightened person has only one arrow that can hit them. The one arrow that hits an enlightened person is the body. The Buddha himself got sick, had pains, said about his body when he was old that it was just like an old cart being held together with leather thongs. But the mind doesn't react. The Buddha was quite ill, on his deathbed, and was able to do the meditative absorptions. But the ordinary person, the worldling, the puthujjana, that person has two arrows that hurt. The body hurts, and the mind hurts with it. When the mind hurts with it, it's imbued with physical dukkha. It reacts to it. Now that's one explanation how the loss of the sufferer, the loss of this ego illusion, brings about the loss of dukkha. But mainly and primarily, our reactions. Whenever we react to something we like by wanting to have it, keep it, and continue it, and whenever we react to something we don't like by wanting to get rid of it as quickly as possible, never see it or hear it again, we're having dukkha. It's our own reactions. And that needs to be investigated. And when we find that, it happens in minor and in very major situations. And when we find that and no longer justify these reactions, we have taken a big step towards transcending dukkha. As long as we're reacting in the mind, we may not even say anything about it. Some people keep very quiet about their dukkha. They don't want to admit it. Some people are even foolish enough to want to hang on to their dukkha. It makes them feel alive. At least something is happening. But those are in the minority. But those who don't want to admit it are in the majority. And then, of course, there are those who will consider anything at all that's happening to them dukkha. Their usual way of conversation is, my problem is this. It's universal. We've all got it. Our problem is that we're here. We've been born, and we must die. And within that time span, between our birth and death, all sorts of things happen, which we would much rather have not happen. And all sorts of things do not happen, which we would have liked to have happened. It's all dukkha. Of course, there are moments when we feel a deep inner peacefulness. I'm sure that has happened to everyone. Very short-lived, unfortunately. When we see a beautiful sunset, a rainbow, we hear exquisite music, watch a happy baby, and we think and immediately make up our minds that the lack of dukkha at that moment is due to the fact that there was a rainbow or a happy baby. Again, we are externalizing. It isn't that at all. It's because in those moments we were so totally concentrated on what is happening that we forgot about ourselves. That's why these are moments without dukkha. Peak experiences, whichever they are. Most people do have at least one in their lives. But externalizing them means that we are, in this case, praising the trigger. In other cases, we usually blame the trigger. Nothing but the trigger. So we can neither praise the trigger nor blame the trigger. They are all outside of us. What's happening within us, that's our life. We usually try to arrange our outer life so that it is convenient and comfortable. And there's no reason why we shouldn't do that. Everybody does it if they can, if they have the opportunity. But do we arrange our inner life so that it's convenient and comfortable? Have we ever given that any thought, that it is actually possible to do that? Is that we can actually do something about our inner life. The contemplation which we've done today should be helpful to understand this particular aspect of the Buddha's teaching in depth. The concentrated meditation should be helpful in showing us that when we lose our attention and connection to this person, there can be peace and happiness. As long as we're thinking, we are totally connected to me. When we lose it even momentarily, that total connection, willingly and happily, we experience moments out of dukkha. All of that should show us where the way to get out of dukkha actually lies. All the things that happen in our lives are, of course, not always connected with dukkha when they happen. But when we see the impermanence and that we would like to have kept what left us, we realize that dukkha is rampant. And the sooner we give up fighting against it, the sooner we'll find happiness. The fight against dukkha, any kind of dukkha, doesn't matter which it is a battleground. Nobody has ever won a battle, even the victor. A battle is always something which creates more dukkha. So seeing things in the perspective of universality will also help us, because we no longer feel that we're singled out with this or that, because life was unkind or our parents didn't understand us, which parent does, or our children are impossible, or anything that is happening outside of us. The sooner we give that up, the quicker we'll find peace within. And that's what everybody wants. It's everybody looking for. Everybody's looking for peace within. That's the comfort and convenience which we can arrange within ourselves, but we've got to do something about it. And trying to turn away from other people is not the answer, because we ourselves are creating the dukkha. It's not other people creating it. There are triggers often, but that's all. So if we take the Buddha's statements seriously, and we should, because meditation cannot be isolated from the teaching. It's part of it. In fact, the fourth noble truth is the noble eightfold path. And on the noble eightfold path, only one step of 8 is meditation. The 8th one. The first 2 are insight. Meditation is part of it, has to be part of it, but it's not the final answer. A final answer is changing our mind. Recognition, no blame, change. Not isolating meditation from the Buddha's teaching is important, because if we do that, we are using our own viewpoint of what is important and what we want to do. And our own viewpoint is beset with the delusion of me. That's why the Buddha gave a discourse, the Brahmajala Sutta, called the Net of Views, in which he gives 62 headings, so to say, of views which we can have. And every one of them is wrong, because they're all based on the premise that we are somebody individually, separately, that we are a personality, someone who is identified with looks, with body, with age, with sex, with belongings, with family. All of that identification helps us to retain that illusion. And therefore, he said, all our views are wrong. So it helps us also when we label in meditation, and I'd like to emphasize that point once more, please label your discursive thoughts. It helps us to see how much of that is just all very personal. And since it's all very personal, how can it be true? It has relative significance, but no absolute truth in it. The relative significance should be let go of for meditation, because meditation can help the mind to see absolute truth. Seeing dukkha as a universal, ever-recurring characteristic of the universe makes it possible to understand what it means to be a human being. And that's really what the Buddha was trying to teach us. What does it mean to be a human being? Dukkha is our first indication by looking at it differently from the way we usually do.